everybody, welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. So today we are talking about the second story in Ray Bradbury's Dark Carnival book. This story is called Skeleton, and it's really good. I think we've already gone over this a bunch, but I'm going to keep saying it. This book is excellent. If you don't have this book and you're looking for something, you should get this book. It's available. It's been unavailable for a very long time. But finally, after a good, 70 or 80 years, it's been published again. So it's absolutely worth grabbing. So this story is in October Country, which was printed in 1955, and of course in Dark Carnival here. The reason I'm bringing that up right now is because I realized that in the last video that I made about the homecoming, I didn't talk about the differences in Dark Carnival to October Country. And the reality is there's not a lot of difference. Over time, I think there's about 8 years between Dark Carnival and October Country. And I feel like in that time he published a ton of stories and just got better as a writer. So what he did is basically edit the stories just a tiny bit to tighten them up just a little before he put them into October Country. It's nothing like a whole new ending or anything crazy like that. One example that I can think of is in The Homecoming, there's the line, I'm going to paraphrase this. He tried to think of nothing, but all he could think about was thinking about nothing, which was almost as good. And in the October Country version, he cut the which was almost as good, right? It's just tiny trimming just to tighten it up. And over those 7 years, I'm sure that he learned a lot. He became much more efficient as a writer. So there are tiny changes, but nothing really dramatic that I need to go over. Same thing is true with Skeleton. Just little tiny subtle things just removed here and there in order to just tighten it up a tiny bit. And it does beg an interesting question. Is October Country better? I think overall I'm going to say yes. And I don't mean as a book in its entirety. Dark Carnival has 27 stories. October Country has like 15 or something, right? It's not even close. This is a must. There are stories in this that have not been republished. So I don't think October Country overall is a better book than Dark Carnival, and you need to pick one or the other. I think you need both. But I do believe that if you really analyzed your feelings after you read The Homecoming in Dark Carnival and then read it in October Country, I think you would have just a tiny bit better experience, like 2% better, and the experience is great either way. So it's not much. I think that's my entire point. The changes are not that much. All right. So this story, just a brief, no spoilers. This is a story about a person who becomes terrified of the fact that they have a skeleton inside of them. It's a very strange subject, and I feel like it's handled in a rather dark way. This isn't just a typical Twilight Zone episode. This is kind of borderline body horror strangeness, which I think is pretty remarkable for 1945. I do, of course, recommend that you get the book. I recommend you read this story, of course. If you have the October Country, you can just read it in that. Obviously, I do still suggest you get this book as well, Dark Carnival. All right, so now I'm going to kind of go into spoilers. So there's a gentleman who always has aching bones. He goes to the doctor over and over. The doctor tells him he's just a hypochondriac and he should get out of his office. And it's weird because they have this little conversation and he says, just quit worrying about it. Quit fussing about it. That'll be $10, right? He literally charges him just for saying that. And then the guy says, but what about all the aching and the pains? It can't be normal. And he says, you're a hypochondriac, and it just went up to $11. Like, this doctor is seriously trying to get this person to understand that he needs to relax. He just needs to relax. There's nothing wrong with his bones. So then he looks in the phone book and finds a bone specialist. And he goes to this bone specialist. And this, for me, is the only kind of bad part about the story. The bone specialist in this is described as a dark man with a strange accent, which is kind of too bad. I wish they could have gone a little bit more into, like, if the lead character had been well traveled and he could say, I don't recognize your accent. Where is it that you're from? And the person doesn't answer or whatever. You know what I mean? Just some way to make them more alien and less just a foreigner, you know? But that was the only part that stuck out. He's got a wife in the book, and she's super intelligent. She's always out working with the Red Cross. She's very supportive of him. I think that character was handled really, really well. It's just this bad guy that gets a little weird, which is too bad. But he goes and sees the bone specialist, and the bone specialist is like, I can't help you until you know that you need my help. If you're wishy-washy about this at all, I cannot help you. And he actually sends the guy on his way. Charges him $10, but sends him on his way. But he sends him with some information. It's got drawings of skeletons and all kinds of things, this pamphlet that he can look through. And he starts to really obsess about this. And he realizes, there's literally a moment in the story where he realizes that there's a skeleton inside of him. There's a skull that's compressing his brain. There's ribs that are compressing his lungs. There is something inside of him that wants to get out. As he looks at other people, he starts to notice their teeth, and he notices their fingernails and things like that, even though later his wife explains to him that fingernails are not part of your skeleton. Seeing these and recognizing these parts of human bodies freaks him out so bad that he literally starts puking. He can't keep down food. He's throwing up. And all of this kind of self-loathing and fear really kind of reminded me of the type of literature that I started finding. I don't know anything about the history of that kind of body horror, self-loathing literature, but it reminded me like of Tetsuo the Iron Man, right? That Japanese film where there's a person who becomes obsessed with the idea of making their body metal. So they literally shove pieces of metal into their body, into their skin. Some of the writings of Michael Gira from the late 70s and early 80s, from The Swans. I mean, really disgusting, dark stuff that I feel like kind of became prevalent around that time. But like I said, I don't know a lot about the history of that type of writing. I was kind of surprised to see how far Ray Bradbury went with this person's fear of their skeleton. Because of course, you could just make a Twilight Zone episode where a guy's flipping out and going to the doctor because he feels like his skeleton is trying to get out, and nobody believes him, and in the end his skeleton busts out of him and he dies, right? You could easily just make that silly Twilight Zone story, which is kind of what I was expecting from this. But the fact that Ray Bradbury went to that extra level of the illness associated with this, right? This person's skeleton does not want to get out of their body. This person is sick. His wife tells him, his doctor tells him, he needs to see a psychiatrist. So he's freaking out. He can't handle it, and he needs to take a trip to Arizona. He lives in California. So he's driving to Arizona, and about halfway there, as he's going through the Mojave Desert, his skeleton takes over. For just a brief moment, it makes his muscles contort, and it jerks the car off the road, and he rolls the car. And he staggers around. He's unconscious for like 5 hours. And then he wakes up and he staggers around through the heat of the desert until the police find him. They get him back to safety. He gets his car fixed. He makes it to Arizona. He has a successful business deal. And then he comes home, but he avoids the desert on the way home. And when he gets home, he realizes that his skeleton is winning. Also, he's losing weight. That's another aspect of the story. Because he can't keep any of his food down, he's really losing weight, and he's afraid that is a sign of his skeleton winning the war. And one night he staggers into a bar and he sees a guy who weighs a ton. I mean, this guy is huge. And he really envies the guy because clearly that guy beat his skeleton. So he goes over and talks to the guy and he says, "How did you put on so much weight? How did you do this?" And the guy describes his body like several living animals, like his intestines are anaconda, right? And he's fed them well and he's taken care of them so that they've grown to such enormous size. I mean, he describes his belly as being able to sit up, and just really weird, shocking ideas about people's bodies and individuals who obsess over specific aspects of their bodies. So he decides he's got to go back to this bone doctor. He tries to go to the office, but every time he walks toward the front door of the doctor's office, his bones attack him, right? They constrict around his brain and cause him intense pain. They restrict around his lungs so he can't breathe. So he can't go to the doctor's office. But when he gets home, he's able to call the doctor. It's very painful, but he calls the doctor and he says, "Please come over." And the doctor says, "I will come over right now." This is the evil doctor, right? The dark doctor with the accent. So the doctor shows up to his house. He can't answer the door. He's on the floor crippled because his skeleton knows the doctor's coming. The doctor comes in and turns off all the lights and begins to shrink. And this is all from the point of view of the person who feels like his skeleton is trying to get out. And he talks about how the doctor looks like he's getting smaller, but it must just be his imagination. And it looks like the doctor's tongue is turning into a straw, right? Some kind of weird circular tongue with a hole in the middle. But it all must just be his imagination. And then he feels this intense pressure in his mouth, and suddenly he can't breathe. His tongue is being pressed down and he's being suffocated. And then he feels this hot liquid shoot into his lungs, into his nasal cavity, and his ears feel like they're going to explode. And then suddenly he can breathe again. But then he has all this intense pain in his ribs and he collapses on the floor and he's yelling to the doctor. He can't see the doctor anywhere. But then he hears from inside his body all this kind of crunching and grinding and chewing. And just at that moment, his wife is coming home from a Red Cross meeting, and she passes the doctor, and the doctor is chewing on this long white stick. He's eating this long white stick, and they pass each other. She doesn't think anything really of it. And then the narration kind of sticks with the bad guy, and he has carved some holes into one of the white sticks, and he starts playing it like a flute. And she goes into the house and, of course, starts screaming because she sees her husband basically without any bones, right? Just a pile of jelly on the floor. And it's very interesting the way Bradbury describes it at the end of this story. He says that as a young person, she had often stepped on jellyfish on the beach, and it made her scream because it hurt so bad. It wasn't so bad seeing a jellyfish in your living room because you could just step back from it. But it was terrifying when the jellyfish called you by name. So it does have kind of a quirky Twilight Zone ending, but I really appreciated and was shocked and disgusted by the fact that Ray Bradbury took this illness of this person so seriously. I really kind of think this was ahead of its time. I feel like there has to be people who are into that kind of really dark body horror stuff, you know. I feel like there's a level where it can be kind of campy and not taken real seriously, and a level where it's taken really seriously, which is really, it's twice as dark and twice as disgusting. And I feel like this story kind of veers in that direction, you know. This isn't just a person growing a third arm out of their head or some weird nonsense stuff. It does have the weird nonsense vampire bone eater thing at the end, right? But the story really takes it seriously as if this is a real person really feeling this and really being sick enough that they need to get rid of their bones. That's very interesting. Very dark, very strange story. I did enjoy it. That is not my favorite kind of literature, straight up. Halfway through I was like, wow, I don't know how this is going to end. I do want to say they did make a Ray Bradbury Theater television show of this story. It's starring Eugene Levy. When I read that, I have not seen that episode. We have some Ray Bradbury Theater. I don't know how much we have, but I do need to start watching that. We should probably make a video about that series because that's incredible. That's a really neat thing that they did. It's in the 80s that it was done. I think it ended in 90. There's 6 seasons. I don't know what we have, but we have some of it. So I was a little bit sad to see that Eugene Levy played the lead guy, only because Eugene Levy is a character actor who often does comedies. And I feel like making a joke out of this really isn't the best approach. I think it does a disservice to the story. Now, it's very, very possible that they all play it really straight, that he's not being funny. But it's difficult even to see him in the role, if they're not going to be funny at all. So I don't know. When I see that, I'll give you an update about how that went. Or if you get to see it, talk about it in the comments, But I just really appreciated that this story was taken very seriously, even though it was really dark. Not my usual cup of tea, But it's still very good, especially for 45. That's shocking to me that it's that early. But once again, I don't know any history about that type of writing because I've never researched it or looked into it in any way. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit the like button. Also, make sure you subscribe because we've got so much more like this. And have a great day.